My name is Charlotte, and I'm 26 years old, still single and without a full-time job. I've been somewhat of a recluse since middle school. Although I attended high school, I eventually dropped out, leaving me with only a middle school education. Since then, I've been living at home with my parents, picking up part-time work and taking on odd jobs I find online. I have an older brother named Sawyer who's 3 years older than me. He's everything I'm not: athletic, popular, and outgoing. Growing up, Sawyer was embarrassed by me. He never brought his friends over, and if we crossed paths in public, like at the convenience store, he would act like he didn't even know me. I tried not to let it bother me, treating it as if it were someone else's problem. When Sawyer went off to college and moved out, I found some peace and stopped worrying about his judgment. But recently, news came that he was getting married. He was about to turn 29, so it wasn't really a surprise. Soon after, we learned that he would be bringing his fiancée over to our parents' house to introduce her. Since I was home that day, I decided to be there for the occasion. "Dad, Mom, I'm home," Sawyer announced as he walked through the door. When he saw me sitting with our parents, he hesitated for a moment, looking slightly confused. "Sorry to intrude," his fiancée said as she entered, blissfully unaware of Sawyer's reaction. But then she turned to me, her face registering surprise. It was clear from her expression that she had no idea who I was. Sawyer must not have mentioned me to her. "Thank you for coming all this way. I'm Sawyer's mother, and this is his father," my mom introduced herself, "and my dad," completely leaving me out. The fiancé nodded politely, still looking a bit puzzled. My father said nothing to acknowledge my presence. My parents have always been hard on me, constantly comparing me to my successful brother. Growing up, I often heard things like, "If your brother can do it, why can't you?" It was their idea of motivation, though it felt more like punishment. As we got older, their disappointment in me only deepened, to the point where I was called a money-sucking leech. It seemed that today, just like every other day, they had decided I wasn't worth acknowledging. "I'll go and get some more drinks," my mother said as she stood up. As she passed by, she leaned down and whispered in my ear, "Why are you here? Go back to your room." I had hoped that by attending this meeting, I might find a way to connect with my family, but it seemed my efforts were in vain. Despite the cold reception, I stayed put, not wanting to leave just yet. My brother's fiancée, Isabella, introduced herself. She was also 26, like me, but she was stunningly beautiful and carried herself with an elegance that made her seem unapproachable. My brother seemed irritated by my presence, likely wishing I wasn't there at all. He introduced Isabella to her parents, but he ignored me entirely, as if I were invisible. Once the formalities about the wedding were over, the conversation shifted to lighter topics, but my brother still acted as though I didn't exist. Then, out of nowhere, Sawyer asked, "What do you usually do, Charlotte?" Before I could respond, my brother cut in sharply, "Wait, Isabella, you don't need to talk to her." His words were blunt and dismissive. Isabella looked taken aback, surprised by his rudeness. "That's right, don't worry about it," my mother added, backing him up. "Yeah, don't worry about it. She's just a stranger with a blood relation," my father chimed in. With those words, something inside me broke. "A stranger, huh? I guess that's what I am," I thought. The idea of reconciliation had been a fantasy all along. The meeting ended as if my presence had never mattered. Soon after, my brother and Isabella got married and began building their new home together. Sawyer had secured a good job at a prestigious company after graduating from college. Even in his late 20s, his income was impressive. Isabella had already left her job to become a full-time homemaker. When their house was completed, they sent out invitations for a housewarming party. The guest list was small, including Isabella's relatives and some of my brother's colleagues. My mother, eager to attend, remarked, "Wow, it's already finished. Time flies. We need to find a housewarming gift. What should we get?" "We're family, so it doesn't have to be anything fancy," my father replied nonchalantly as he glanced at the invitation. Only my parents' names were listed. Mine was noticeably absent. My mother noticed this and asked, "Charlotte is coming too, right?" I couldn't understand her sudden concern. After the way they treated me at the last meeting, why would she expect me to go? "It's fine if I'm not invited," I said, trying to excuse myself, but my mother insisted, "No, you're coming. I'll make sure of it." Reluctantly, I agreed to go. On the day of the party, it started raining unexpectedly. My parents and I took a taxi to my brother's new home. Due to the rain, Sawyer and Isabella greeted guests at the entrance rather than outside. As soon as we arrived, my mother turned to me and said, "You pay for the taxi," before stepping out with my father, leaving me to handle the fare alone. Without umbrellas, my parents hurried toward the entrance, leaving me to pay for the taxi. It struck me as extravagant, but since I was the one expected to cover the fare, I paid and ran after them. As I reached the entrance, Isabella, who I had only met once before, looked at me with confusion. "Who are you?" she asked, her tone nonchalant. I introduced myself. "I'm Charlotte, Sawyer's sister." With a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she said, "Ah, the high school dropout. We didn't invite the parasite living off our parents." Her casual tone and the way she sneered at me were chilling. Just then, Sawyer came out from inside, his face showing disdain. "Ha, what are you doing here? I told you not to invite her. Why is she here?" "I don't know either," Sawyer replied, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Isabella's attitude shifted from polite to dismissive once she realized who I was. It was clear she was worse than my brother and parents combined. "Would it have been better if I hadn't come?" I asked cautiously. "Yeah, you're a stranger because of your low education. Not finishing high school doesn't even count as an education. Could you please leave?" Isabella's calm, detached demeanor made her words all the more harsh. "Understood," I said, turning away. With the taxi gone and no umbrella to shield me from the downpour, I trudged through the rain. Isabella's laughter echoed behind me, adding to the sting of my humiliation. By the time I got home, I was soaked to the bone. My parents returned, looking pleased with themselves. They saw my drenched appearance and asked, "Why did you leave suddenly? Couldn't even call a taxi for the way back? You're so useless," my mother said with a hint of annoyance. "I'm sorry, I suddenly had a stomachache." I lied to cover up my embarrassment. "You left just because of that. You're hopeless. Make sure to send the gift later. You're an adult now," my father said. I had brought a gift for the party but never had the chance to give it. I wanted to mail it, but I didn't have the address. I could ask my parents for the address, but the tension was too thick, so I decided to contact my brother directly. "I want to send a gift. Can you tell me the address?" I texted him. His response was curt, "I don't give my address to strangers." I sighed, feeling a mix of frustration and disbelief. Was it truly satisfying for him to assert dominance in private, or was he just enjoying humiliating me further? I wondered if Isabella was involved in sending these messages, perhaps laughing at my predicament. Regardless, their behavior was absurd. I decided against sending a gift and made up my mind to move out. It was clear that my family and I were not going to get along, and I needed to find my own path. With some savings from my part-time jobs, I managed to rent a small room and live independently. Though it wasn't much, I found solace in my new freedom. I turned to video streaming in my spare time, a hobby I was already passionate about. I quickly adapted to trends and methods to boost viewership, and my efforts paid off. I started earning tens of thousands each month, covering my living expenses and allowing me to invest in various ventures. Running a small import business added to my busy but fulfilling routine. I was content, and the absence of familial complaints about my computer use made me appreciate my independence even more. A few months later, I received an unexpected call from my parents, who hadn't reached out since I left home. "We need your help. Sawyer needs financial assistance," they said. "Why?" I asked, genuinely curious. I was surprised that someone who had just built a new house could be in financial trouble. My parents reluctantly explained the situation. After moving into his new house, Sawyer had hosted frequent parties with bosses, executives, clients, and Isabella's acquaintances. At one of these gatherings, someone pitched a risky investment opportunity. Sawyer, trusting the proposal, ended up losing a significant amount of money, lured by promises of high returns. I was astonished. With his decent job, Sawyer could have avoided this if he had simply continued working hard. It was a shame. "And who recommended this investment? Is it a scam?" I asked, my concern growing. "No, it's not a scam. It's one of Isabella's acquaintances," my parents said, showing their complete trust in Isabella. "How much do you need?" I inquired, suspecting the amount was substantial, considering Sawyer's situation. The amount they mentioned was staggering, far beyond what a typical company employee could easily afford. "Is that really just for my brother?" I asked hesitantly, already fearing the worst. My brother whispered to Isabella, but it was already too late. Sawyer. Oh, It's you. The company president walked straight up to my brother, scrutinizing his face. You're the one who always follows Mr. Long, the division manager, right? We owe a lot to your company. My brother's face turned beet red, sweat pouring from every pore. Ah, that's. I guess I'm not very memorable since we're not a top-notch company. The president threw my brother's own words back at him, and my brother could only stammer, "Oh," before freezing in place. My father, mother, and Isabella quickly sensed the situation was spiraling and fell silent. I turned to the president, apologizing. "I'm sorry for the disturbance. I'll ask them to leave." "Oh, are you sure? I have time today, so I don't mind waiting." "You can prioritize talking with your family," the president offered. "No, they're not my family," I replied, glancing at my parents' and brother's family. "They're complete strangers." With that, my parents' and brother's family were ushered out of the company. Perhaps stunned by their encounter with the company president, they left without further protests. I later discovered that Isabella was the reason for their unannounced visit. Isabella had a friend who was well-versed in investment schemes and had been keeping an eye on rising talents. When she saw a photo of me in the media and realized I was the middle school dropout and NET she'd heard about, she mentioned it to my brother and parents. This led them to believe I was a potential source of money. As I had feared, my parents admitted, we were also introduced to the same investment opportunity. They hesitated before admitting this, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "I can't come up with that much money so easily." "Sorry," I said, trying to end the call. But my parents persisted. "We're your real family. Help us out in times like these." "Real family? Too little, too late," I retorted. "Sorry, but I'm busy and I'm a stranger to you, right?" With that, I hung up. Later, my parents and my brother's family somehow found my office. I was in the middle of a business meeting when my secretary came in to inform me, "There are guests here for you, President." "I don't have any other appointments." "Who are they?" "They claim to be your family, ma'am." "What?" I was taken aback. I apologized to my business partner and excused myself. When I reached the reception area, I saw my pregnant sister-in-law Isabella, my brother, and my parents standing there. "You're running a company, huh?" "Well, it's much smaller than where I work," my brother said with a smirk, looking around disdainfully. "Who are you?" I asked, feigning ignorance. "What's with the attitude?" My brother snapped, clearly irritated. My mother stepped in. "We discussed this before. We need your support. You're running a company, so you can help us out, right?" She asked for money as if it was her right. "Yes, it's an important time for our family. Isabella is about to give birth, and the child's growth isn't good. We need to see a good doctor." "Please, Charlotte," my father and Isabella added, as if it was my obligation to cover their debts. Employees were beginning to notice the commotion at the reception. To minimize the disturbance, I said, "Please leave. You're causing a disruption." My brother's face turned red with anger. "What? We're a disturbance. We came all the way here, and this is how you treat your family," he shouted. Several employees paused to watch the scene unfold. My brother started making a scene, shouting, "Do you all know this girl dropped out of middle school? She was a shut-in at NET." He seemed determined to humiliate me into giving him money. But the employees responded in a way he didn't expect. "We know. Everyone knows the president's background," one employee said calmly. "Exactly. The president even hires people from similar backgrounds. Is there a problem with that?" Another added. My brother, who typically associated only with highly educated and high-income individuals, was clearly taken aback. He stammered, Meanwhile, my father took the opportunity to insult the company further, saying, "What a pathetic place. Just a gathering of NETs." "Exactly. Companies that associate with a place like this can't be any good either," my brother shouted, his voice filled with disdain. Just then, the president of the company I was meeting with, who had been waiting in the reception area, emerged. Clearly, he had overheard the commotion. My brother's face went from anger to shock and then to pallor as he realized who was standing in front of him. He lowered his gaze, clearly disconcerted. "What's wrong, Sawyer?" Isabella asked, bewildered. "Idiot, don't say my name," my brother hissed in frustration. They had come to my company after I didn't return their calls or answer their requests for financial help. Given that I had been treating them as strangers, I chose not to get involved further. However, I did look into Isabella's background and found out some startling details. It turned out that Isabella's friend, who was involved in their financial troubles, was actually her ex-boyfriend. Not only that, but the child Isabella was expecting wasn't my brother's, it was the child of the investor. My brother was devastated to discover the truth, as everything had been a lie. Isabella had been using her ex-boyfriend's advice to scam money from several men, including my brother. In the wake of this, my brother and Isabella divorced. Isabella and her ex-boyfriend were taken into police custody, but recovering the lost money seemed unlikely. As for my brother's job, his position at work deteriorated rapidly. He was moved to a less desirable department and eventually resigned, unable to handle the fallout from the financial disaster. My father also faced consequences when the president witnessed him berating the subcontractor. After reviewing his work attitude, he was fired. It came to light that he had been making derogatory remarks similar to those he used to make about me, such as, "Junior high or high school graduates are worthless. And if you didn't graduate from a prestigious university, you're not a real person." Both my brother and father lost their jobs, and the former family, now struggling financially, still tries to contact me, hoping to reconcile. I had them banned from entering my company's building so they can no longer intrude. Despite everything, they still call me, trying to reconnect. My response remains unchanged. I don't know you, you're complete strangers to me, and I have no intention of altering my stance in the future.